And it's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. When the people fear their government, there's tyranny. When a government fears its people, there's liberty. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, there are a couple of what I would call alchemies of demagoguery. There are buttons that we all have that were installed in us during the 20,000 generations that human beings were wandering the African savannah in little groups, warlike groups, fighting with other groups, defending themselves against, lions and predators and trying to feed themselves. And a lot of our hardwiring was installed during that key evolutionary period. And, we were following a powerful male leader and doing what we were told, and you had to have unit cohesion, and you had to behave like everybody else because otherwise you weren't arguing with the leader all the time. You had to do things, and we all have that programming internally. And so there's a couple of things that every demagogue can use to manipulate people, and one of those is fear. And because it disables our capacity for critical thinking. And during the Great Depression, even before the war in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt gave a speech where he said to the American public, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This is after Wall Street crash. And what he was saying then was that he saw what was happening in Europe, which was suffering from the same depression. And in Eastern Europe, in Russia and the Soviet Union, democracy was collapsing everywhere because of the economic pressure, and you were seeing the rise of tyrants on the right and tyrants on the left, and each one was using fear and the other alchemy of demagoguery, which is racism, to point to minority groups and saying they did it to you, they're dangerous to you. So these are all things that were installed in us, during that multi-million-year period, and people can come and exploit them today and disable our capacity for critical thinking. What Roosevelt was saying is the fear is actually our enemy. If we have confidence, we can restore American capitalism. At that point, 30% of the people in this country believed that capitalism had failed and that the answer was communism, and 30% believed that capitalism had failed and that the answer was fascism. And there was a small minority who still believed, in democracy and free market capitalism. And Roosevelt, through his strength of character, through his persuasion, through his absolute indomitable calmness, was able to tell people, don't be scared, the fear is your enemy. Because fear is going to be used by demagogues like Father Coughlin at that time, or Huey Long, or these other demagogues who were trying to, drum up anger and fear. And he said, don't, that is the enemy. If we stay calm, we'll come out of this. And he was able to restore American capitalism because of that. And it's an important lesson. During COVID, you had both Republican and Democratic governments that were using fear to manipulate people, to tell us, do this, do that, and not, they were telling us to do things that they knew and we knew were wrong, to allow censorship of critics, to allow doctors to be silenced, to allow people who said they were injured to be silenced, to ask people who were standing up for the children and saying, wait a minute, how can you keep kids out of school? They have no vulnerability to COVID, to shut them up. And to silence everybody, where I was, they were giving $1,000 tickets to surfers who were out on the ocean and telling them to go home. Or a disease that even then we knew did not spread outdoors, but it spread at home when you're locked up. And it was crazy what we were being told to do, but everybody was complying because they were using fear. And to me, my party, the Democratic Party, I said this, time and again. I said, Roosevelt told us don't use fear, and yet the entire government strategy at that time was just to scare the hell out of everybody. You remember they had the COVID death count every day on CNN ticking like a time bomb that it was going to come and get you, and everybody was put in this state of, you know, your neighbor is a biohazard, don't go near them. And, you know, and we were telling our kids, putting masks on our kids and telling them not to smile at their friends, not to hug their friends. And it was atomizing society and fragmenting it and making it, you know, and that kind of society is very easy to manipulate. You know, I'll tell you, can I
oh, yeah,
tell one other? There was another one of those alchemies, one of those buttons, is our tendency from all those years we spent on the African savannah to follow a strong leader, a person of authority, particularly a male leader who will tell us what to do. So there's an experiment called that, you know, the CIA financed a lot of studies during the 1950s and 1960s that were mind control studies to figure out how do you manipulate individuals to become a Manchurian candidate, how do you manipulate whole societies in order to impose foreign control or totalitarian control. The names of the program, the first ones were Operation Bluebird, Operation Artichoke, and then the later ones were called MK Naomi, MK Dietrich, MK Ultra. The MK stands for mind control. And they were financing hundreds of studies in universities around the country by usually sociologists or psychiatrists or social scientists to do different experiments with psychedelic drugs, with torture, with sensory deprivation, with you know, sound deprivation for various forms of other psychiatric drugs, et cetera. One of those studies was a guy called Stanley Milgram, who was an associate professor at Yale. And he did a study where he recruited about 60 people from all walks of life, students, professors, blacks, whites, business people, every kind of American. And he would bring them in and put them in a room where they had a dial in front of them. And they were told if they turned that dial, it would give an electric pulse to a person who was tied to a chair in the adjoining room. They couldn't see that person, and that person was, in fact, an actor who was a confederate of Dr. Milgram's. When they turned it up, he would scream and struggle and plead and beg and cry. So, and Dr. Milgram would say, turn it up, turn it down, turn it up, turn it down, turn it higher, turn it down, turn it higher. And people who were part of that experiment, who were this, you know, the people who were the recruits, the subjects, a lot of them were weeping because they did not want to do it. And yet Dr. Milgram was there in a lab coat with, you know, all of these badges on him and stuff. So he was this visible figure of authority. 60, you can look this up on Wikipedia, which you should not believe for other, but unless they're actually telling the truth. But if you, 67% of the people in that experiment turned it up to 250 volts where it was marked potentially lethal. The good news is that 33% of the people got up and walked out. So there's a cadre of people who maintain their capacity for critical thinking even when all of these sort of atavistic stimuli are applied against them to disable that. And, you know, that I think is our aim in a democracy, is to try to be part of that group of 33% who can't be manipulated by fear and can't be manipulated by racism or anti-Semitism or, you know, all of these other alchemies of demagoguery or authority figures. You know, and my father told me a couple of weeks before he died, I had a conversation with him where he said to me, people in authority lie. And, you know, that is something that is critical in a democracy for the public to know. Our job Part of our job in democracy is to question everything. You know, this phrase, trust the experts, it's not a thing. It certainly is not a feature of democracy. It's not a feature of science. In science, you don't trust the experts, never. No, I've had what, over 500 cases. And in each one of them, there was scientific controversy, and there was experts on both sides. When I sued Monsanto, Monsanto came in with experts from Stanford, Harvard, and Yale. My wife, who's an actor, came to court that day, on the last day of their testimony. She watched these people, and then afterwards, and they're so convincing. She walked out and she said, "Why are you even troubling this poor company?" To me. And I would like, wait till tomorrow. The next day, we had our experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and the jury gave us $2.2 billion. They had heard both of them, and they had to decide which expert is lying. And experts have their own prejudice, they have their own biases, and their own ambitions, et cetera. And so it's not, trusting the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism. But it's not something we do. Well, we were all told to do it, right? Again and again, trust the experts. And it's something that should set alarms off.